So another issue of deadly force, right, I started earlier by talking specifically about police shootings, and this ties back to the issue of impunity. Folks hopefully know about the case of Rashad McIntosh, right, or Rashad McIntosh, who was shot and killed by the CPD about a month ago. And there have been a lot of protests taking place. Community witnesses all say that he had his hands up, was saying, my hands are up, don't shoot me, please don't kill me, right, were his last words. I have another testimony I'm going to share now. So it says, due to the killing of Rashad McIntosh, the police is harassing the citizens in this community. On the side of the building where he was murdered, there were citizens playing cards who saw the entire encounter. When one of them spoke out, the police beat him. The residents of this community are scared and fear that it could be them. The way they intimidated the crowd that night of the murder was a sign of the police being a gang, taking up for their own, and trying to cover up what really happened. This community is outraged that they shot him down in broad daylight and are intimidating citizens because they want to tell what happened. The detective leading this case has yet to speak with any of the citizens that were present at the time of this homicide. They haven't released any information to our family or even a phone call about something so simple as a police report, nor autopsy. We need answers, and we're going to all costs to get them. I hope you can help us in any way, because we need all the help we can get. We're not even allowed to go to the police station and talk to anyone. Every time we go, they tell us they would give us a call, but it never happened. They still haven't released the name of the officer who shot Rashad, and his mother wants to know. So actually this isn't the last one, I have one more. So next is sexual assault. And this is something that we really leaned heavily on the work that the Young Women's Empowerment Project had done, because they had this incredible report that has a ton of testimonies that speak to the sexual violence that the Chicago police are inflicting on young people. And so I have another story here that says, I was walking to the bus when a police officer called out and said, hey you, come here girl with all of that ass. I ignored the comment, unaware of where it was coming from, until he pulled up on the curb to block my path in his undercover cop car. He jumps out and yells, didn't you hear me calling you girl? I replied simply by saying, no, my name isn't girl with all that ass. He got very mad and slapped me, saying I was disrespectful and saying, don't you know who I am? I began to fear him, so I slowly backed away, and he ran up and chokeslammed me, saying I insulted an officer and was under arrest. When people started to come and look, he handcuffed me, placed me in the back seat and drove away. When we stopped in an alley, I realized he wasn't taking me in. He got out of the car, came to where I was, and tried to rape me. The CPD still handles all complaints around sexual assault. Only 20% of those complaints lead to any kind of penalty. And so we know that young people, through strip searches, but also just through just general encounters that start on the sidewalk, are being sexually assaulted by the police, right? It's sexual harassment, it's sexual violence, it's rape. And this is absolutely torture. This is the UN has said, if a law enforcement does any kind of sexual violence against a person in the country, that's torture. That's not cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, it's torture. And we know this is happening, right? And it's happening with impunity. Another thing is that because of the ways that young people of color are being targeted by the police, we know that we live in an era of mass incarceration, right? So young people of color are being sent into detention centers, right? Juvenile detention centers. And the ones that we have in Illinois, again, are quite exceptional in how awful they are. 15% of the young people in juvenile detention centers are sexually victimized by adult staff, by guards, right? 15%, that's 50% greater than the national average. Now, the other thing is that even the United States, the UN condemns solitary confinement and isolation of prisoners, right? Even the US is like, oh, we still think it's kind of okay, but not young people. We don't do that to our young people, unless it's to protect them. So young people that are sexually victimized while incarcerated are then put into solitary confinement in the name of protecting them, which is the US and the UN acknowledges that's also torture. We're torturing our young people through sexual violence, absolutely. So then this connects to this issue of mass arrest and detention. We live in the era of mass incarceration. When we look at young people, we see overwhelmingly that Black folks, especially young Black people, are the bulk of who is being incarcerated and targeted of our young people. So even though Black people only account for 33% of the Chicago population, in 2011 we see that 77% of youth arrests were of Black people. And in 2012 we see that 79% of youth arrests were of Black people. And if you look at, there are 25 police districts. Doesn't matter what district, doesn't matter what the demographics are of that district. Every single one, the percentage of black people who are arrested is significantly greater than the percentage of black people who live in that neighborhood. And it's at its worst in a majority white districts. Let me make sure. So this is something that I really want to point out. So the Black Youth Project, or BYP100, has been doing a campaign around trying to address the criminalization of blackness. And we know that police on a daily basis, the most common thing they're doing is they're going out and they're arresting black people for weed when they're supposed to be giving tickets. So that's a campaign that's happening right now that folks can support. They have a petition, they need support, right? That helps to address some of these issues. Because the bulk of these are folks that are getting caught up because of their being arrested for marijuana when they should just be ticketed. Another thing that we have, though, is this threat of mass arrest. So I have a story here. The police rounded up everyone on a block corner because of an incident that happened down the block. Whoever fit the description was liable to be arrested and detained. My sister's boyfriend was arrested for unruly behavior for expressing grief over his nephew being shot. I was threatened to be arrested for the same offense if I didn't leave the scene, although I live across the street. I believe the police in my neighborhood are only interested in filling their quotas. So I want to highlight again another local issue that's taking place, which is over the murder of Deshaun Pittman, a young Chicagoan who was recently killed by the Chicago police. And after his death, there were some protests, and his mother was arrested, as well as several of his friends. The mother was able to be bailed out so that she could make it to her son's funeral, but there are still, I believe, 3 people from that, 3 young people who are still in jail and need to be bailed out. They have really absurdly high bail set. One has a lower bail of about, I think it was $1900. They need $1,900 more to get this one person out of jail. So folks can make a donation. If you look up Bond, Devontae, and Lakendra out of jail, they need money to get those young people out. So then this big issue of inaction in Geneva that has sort of been already called in several times now. So here, we were really lucky when we started working on this report. There was this huge data set that had just been made public to us through the Invisible Institute. And this data set showed sort of like the worst of the worst. So the first thing is that it showed us between, I have to look at the years, hold on a second. What we saw was that between 2002 and 2008, there were 195 CPD officers who had at least 5 or more excessive force complaints made against them. All right. Now, if we look at those 195 police officers, only 28 of them got any penalty at all. So only 2%. So if you look at all the complaints made against them, there were 1,509. Only 2% of them had some kind of penalty. So it's 32 complaints actually led to something. And we see most of them, 41% are just reprimands or violation noted. 31% are suspensions of less than a week, so 1 to 5 days. If we look at more generally, just general misconduct complaints, we see that between 2001 and 2006, there were 662 police officers who had at least 10 or more misconduct complaints made against them. Out of the combined 10,735 complaints, only 219 were given any kind of penalty. So 508 of these 662 officers have never gotten a penalty for any of those things. So some of the issues of the ways that complaints are handled, right? If the CPD handles it, in 85% of the complaints, the officer that's named in the complaint isn't even interviewed, right? They're not even interviewed to be like, hey, someone complained that this happened, what can you tell me your side of the story? They don't even bother in 85% of the cases. The other issue is that these are just sort of like the initial, yeah, this penalty is what we recommend. But then there's many other layers of folks above that have an opportunity to appeal or dismiss that complaint. So we think that about half of them don't even end up making it all the way up to the top. The other issue is that we have, we know that if you look at officers who in the span of 5 years receive 50 or more complaints in that 5 years, that only 13% of them are getting flagged for early intervention or monitoring programs. So we know that like the education and training is not sufficient, right? Only 13% of officers with 50 or more complaints in just 5 years are being flagged for like, hey, you need some extra training here. And we also know, right, that we're not seeing prompt and impartial investigations because not even the cops are being interviewed, right? Absolutely absurd. That was everything? Yes, okay. So all of this is to say, right, that at base, the The CPD's conduct constitutes as torture and cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment, and is occurring at extraordinary rates, disproportionately against minorities, against young people of color specifically, and with impunity. And I want to add that this violence is being used as a way to really silence, isolate, control, and repress people of color, particularly young people, right? And I have one last testimony I want to share, which is, I'm affected greatly by police brutality, directly and indirectly. Even seeing other human beings being harassed by police, I still feel violated because it's violent. It's not acceptable at all. It's a total disregard for people's value. The way police carry themselves and the way they talk to people is disgusting. It's horrible. It's violent. It's a flexing of authority. They like oppressing people, and it seems like that's the whole intention, to take people's power away from them. A lot of times I feel like my power is being taken away. So that was by a young person named Marlon, by the way. So that's what we shared in this report. That's sort of a rough overview. And what we're hoping for, what we're asking the UN to do, our demands of the UN, is to acknowledge this problem. After we leave, after we come back, a few weeks later, the UN is going to release sort of their concluding remarks. And it's going to say, so here's the problem, here's what you're doing well, United States, here are the problems that we see, and here's what you need to do to fix it. We want the CPD named, we're hoping that the CPD gets called out explicitly for its violence against young people of color. But really, any acknowledgement that police brutality is happening and it's framed as torture or cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, that's a huge, huge win for us. We can use that. That's really important for us to have. Because what it does is it helps opens up a window for us to be like, hey, CPD, you're torturing people. You need to tell us how you're going to stop this. And we're asking that the UN demand a response from the CPD saying, here's how we plan to stop this abuse. And here's how we plan to compensate the individuals, families, and communities that have been targeted by this violence, right? And again, that includes what does meaningful rehabilitation look like, right? I don't know what compensation looks like. I think we need to ask the folks who are involved, right? The young people who have been experiencing this every day. And the last thing is asking for federal intervention, right? We know that they're supposed to have a database, they don't. So while we're waiting for them to get their act together and do that, we want them to come to Chicago and open a pattern and practice investigation to look at the data and use their DOJ clout to get access to data and to start finding what are things that we're not even collecting that we need to be. That might then enter into something called a consent decree, which is a federal overtake of the police department to manage reforms. So with that, I believe I am done, and I would like to invite, yes.